Welcome to the Widows Collective, where grief meets hope, healing, and community. I'm Lauren Lentz, grief coach, fellow widow, and the heart behind this space. There is life before loss, and then there is life after. If you're here, it likely means your life has been turned upside down by the death of your person. Maybe you've just found yourself in this new world that feels unrecognizable, or maybe you've been walking it for a while, trying to figure out what healing looks like now. I want you to know you are not alone. This podcast is a gathering place for widows living in the after. Together, we'll name the ache, honor the love, and share tools, truths, and stories that help you feel supported along the way. My hope is that every episode gives you a sense of community, comfort, and permission to meet yourself exactly where you are. Hello, and welcome back to the Widows Collective. Today's episode is a lot longer than usual, so break it up into chunks if you need, but it is the final episode of this season, and it's one I know will hit deeply with many widowed parents. We are talking about one of the biggest fears so many grieving moms or dads carry after the death of a spouse. Will my child be ruined by this? When something as devastating as parent loss happens, it's hard not to wonder what it will mean for them long term. Who will they become because of this? What will they carry? How will this loss shape their life moving forward? And I think this fear can feel especially overwhelming because as parents, there is often a deep instinct to protect our children from pain. Yet, this is one of the situations where we cannot take the pain away. We cannot change what happened. We cannot grieve for them. We can only walk beside them through it. And that can feel incredibly vulnerable. Not only are you grieving yourself, you are simultaneously trying to support a grieving child or children while your own nervous system is in survival mode too. And many widowed parents carry enormous pressure around this. Pressure to say the right things, to handle emotions correctly, prevent future pain, stay emotionally stable, be everything their child needs, and somehow not mess this up, in air quotes. So today, I am joined by Jessica Correnti, a certified child life specialist, grief specialist, author, and bereaved mom with nearly 2 decades of experience supporting grieving children and families. After years working in pediatric hospital settings, Jessica founded Kids Grief Support, where she now provides grief support and education to families around the world. She's also the author of several children's grief books, including the ABCs of Grief series and Forever Connected. Her work has been featured in outlets like Oprah Daily, People Magazine, and CNBC. I'm really grateful to have her here for this conversation because I know so many of us are carrying fears and questions around how to support their children going through something this life-altering while also trying to survive it themselves. Take a listen. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this conversation, I know this conversation is going to land in the hearts of so many. This is something that I really struggled with as a new widow. And I know through my clients and just through my experiences with other widows that the conversation that we're going to be having today is something that's on their hearts and their minds. And it's when our person passed away, when Kevin was killed, I started to have so many worries about my son. He was 14 months old at the time, and he was very much actively grieving, although, you have lots of thoughts and opinions from the outside world that you need to take care of yourself, and through that, he'll be okay. But I was like, what will this do to our son? And will he be ruined? Will I ruin him? Who will he become without his father? And all these questions that would come up. Am I going to be able to carry the responsibility of 2 roles moving forward? And how do I help him process the death of his dad? So I know that you so gently carry this for families, and I felt like you were the perfect person to have this conversation with today. So I want to just dive right in and start with the first question that I have, which is, what do you think is underneath the fear so many widowed parents carry that their child will somehow be permanently ruined from this loss?
Thank you. You spoke to it so much in just your sharing of your experience. And it's this very natural human instinct to want to protect as a parent and to want to take away any pain for your child. And the reality is that we can't protect our kids from pain. We can't take away suffering or fix things for them. And at the same time, that's not to say that we can't support them in it and sit with them in it. So I think it's so natural that parents do have these big worries, and parents who have gone through grief often are putting their children's needs before theirs. And yeah, the outside world does want to say, oh, you can't take care of your kids until you take care of yourself. But the reality is we are going to want to take care of our kids before ourselves. That's just the reality. And when we know that our kids' needs are being met, then we feel like we can take care of our own needs. And by saying that, at the same time, we do need to take care of ourselves, and taking care of ourselves as parents, as adults, can be a beautiful model for our children to be able to do the same and watch how we cope with difficult things too. So I hope that I answered your question in that, but I think just like the permission that we don't need to fix it for our kids, and we're not going to get it all perfect. It's always going to be evolving and messy. But I think that is really what's underneath at the core of all of that. It's we want to, help make things a little bit easier for them.
Yeah, and it is a delicate balance, isn't it? Because I do think, of course, put the oxygen mask on first. And it's much easier said than done, because when you are seeing your children in pain, their pain is much harder to deal with than our own. We, as adults, we're like, okay, we've got this. We can handle this. But when you feel that helplessness, like you can't fix it, just like other people feel for us sometimes, right? It's like
Their pain becomes your pain.
right. And we have such a strong desire to figure out what they need. That kind of takes us into the next question, which is, what are some of the most common fears or worries you hear from grieving parents after the death of a spouse?
Yeah, I think there are a few things that come up with this one. I think some of them we've already kind of talked about, that there's this idea of, their life is going to be ruined forever. They're going to feel isolated or different. I know that sometimes bullying comes up as something that kids face when they are going through really any sort of difference, grief being one of those. I know for widows specifically, there is this idea or fear of not having a father figure or a mother figure, and how that might be for their child. And maybe they think, eventually there will be a mother or father figure in the picture, but it's not, their person, their dad, their mom who died. So there's this wonder of, what's going to happen. Along with that same line of thinking, there are a lot of fears that widows and widowers have with dating after loss too. So I think with every single milestone, whether it's a developmental milestone or a new milestone that you as a family unit are going through, there are these layers of worries and what ifs and should I or could I, like there are so many different things to think about. And I think that's often something that people who are not in this type of experience, they don't really understand. They think it's just that first primary loss. They don't really know about all of these secondary losses that families can go through when one of the parents has died, and it's a lot.
1 trillion%. So layered, so complex. And you just hit the nail on the head there. The next question is something that over the years and inside my own practice, I often hear widows say, and they say things like, I don't want to cry or fall apart in front of my child or my children, or I can't let them see me upset because I don't want to terrify them. And I think this belief is far more prevalent than we realize, that showing heavy emotions will somehow damage our children. So a few questions here, and I am going to merge a couple of them. So the first two is, what would you want grieving parents to understand about children witnessing grief and emotional expression after loss? And with that, can it actually be beneficial for children to see grief modeled in emotionally safe ways?
Yeah. I'm so glad you're asking this question because there is such a fear around showing big feelings around kids. And this, um, I'd call it a misconception that that is going to be damaging. And it's actually quite the opposite. I will say there's a balance with this. So it is healthy for kids to see the full range of emotions, including seeing their parent crying and maybe even seeing their parent get angry and then repair afterwards if there is something that was tough with that anger outburst. So for example, I know a lot of parents when they're overloaded and things feel too much, we might we might take it out on those that we love the most. So we might get upset and get kind of brash with our responses, or we might yell when we really didn't want to. And we're human. We can go and repair that afterwards and say, that's really not how I wanted that to come out. I was feeling really frustrated, or I was feeling, really sad. And that came out as anger for me. And I shouldn't have said it in that way, or whatever it is. But you can repair that because sometimes that anger is how it comes out for us when we're overloaded specifically. So, the sadness, the tears are okay to come out. And I think it's also really helpful when we can label those things for our kids. If they come up to us and say, why are you crying, mommy?
Mhm.
Because I just really miss dad right now. And that opens up a window for the kids to also have a conversation as well. They might join in and say, I really do too. And it might carry on this conversation, or it might be a 2-3 sentence conversation, because often that so much is what happens with our younger children. It's not a big, long conversation, but that connection right there of validating what they probably feel too is huge. And kids can also see, okay, what does mom do with those sad feelings? Okay, she cries. It's okay to cry. Or she cries and then maybe she wants to go outside and go for a walk, and that's helpful. So not only is it validating the emotions, it's also watching, having the child watch the parent expressing those emotions and seeing what they do with those emotions. It can also teach and model coping skills too.
Mm.
So that is huge. And that piece that's a balance. So we definitely want our kids to be able to see these different ranges of emotions, including these uncomfortable ones, but we don't want them to feel responsible for caring for our emotions. So that's where the balance comes in. So if your child is always coming in to rescue and they feel like they need to step on eggshells to, make sure that you're always happy or whatever that might be, we can reassure them, it's not your job to take care of my feelings. And you can even say, I'm taking care of my feelings by, and maybe it's, I have my therapist to help take care of my feelings, or I go to exercise class every day to take care of, to have a good release for these feelings, whatever it is. But having that sentence of, I really appreciate you wanting to help me. And it's not your job to take care of my feelings. So there's a balance, and there's not a black and white answer of like what that balance is. You know your child best, so where that threshold is. And sometimes it's a dance. Sometimes we might feel like we're showing a little too much and we need to pull it back a little bit, or vice versa. So there's not a hard line in the sand here to say this is, the exact, this is how much you should or should not show. But it is healthy to show some emotions with your kids, including those tough ones.
I love that. And it was funny because as you were speaking, I started thinking about, which I did not have a question for, the responsibility that children put on themselves to care for that parent. And we talk about it all the time, especially with young boys. It's like, I have to take care of my mommy. I have to be the man in this story now, right? And they've kind of put this on themselves. And so I love how you
Society does too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, people
take care of mommy.
Say, yeah, you got to take care of mommy, be strong for her. Yeah, there are these messages that young boys get all the time that are, putting a lot of pressure on them, and it's damaging to their grief process too. They should be allowed to fall apart, and they should be allowed to be a child and not have any adult responsibilities. They might have these different responsibilities that they wouldn't have before, and they should not have to take on these heavily adult roles in the house. So it's a sad and unfortunate thing that does happen to a lot of young boys in these type of grief situations.
Yeah, the additional layer of grief. Absolutely.
And I'll just add one more thing here too that was just coming to mind. It's natural for kids to want to protect their surviving parent as well. So we're not going to be able to take all of that away because they know that you're hurting, and they know that showing their full range of emotions might be too much for you as a parent too. And that's why I love to encourage people to have these open spaces for their grieving children to process their grief outside of the family unit too. So, and that can look like a lot of different things. Maybe that looks like seeing a children's grief specialist. Maybe that looks like going to a grief center, a grief camp, or just spaces where kids can feel like they can share their grief in an unfiltered way, because it is natural for them to want to protect their surviving parent too. So
absolutely.
There are a lot of nuances and layers.
There are. I mean, we could be on here for hours talking about all of those different nuances. You're right. I want to go back real quickly to just kind of extend a piece of our conversation, which is distinguishing between healthy emotional expression and emotional overwhelm that may feel too big for a child to carry alone. And I know you said it's kind of you read your own child, but are there indicators that there may be that what you are showing, obviously unconsciously, not purposely trying to cause harm, but that you are showing that may be too big for a child to carry?
That's a good question. And I don't know if there's, again, any like black and white answer to this. I mean, I would always encourage adults to find their own grief circles where they can really process everything. I mean, we don't want to have, this. I'm trying to think of how to articulate this. Like this, you don't want to dump all of your grief onto your child with like processing, what happened with that day, and what you don't want them to essentially be like, try and be your therapist.
Right.
You want to have these open spaces where you can have, adult to adult conversations, whether it's with a professional or, if you have a friend who can really create that safe space for you to just listen and hear you out on things. So it's yeah, I would say, you don't want them to be your primary support for sure. So I don't know if that answered it necessarily.
It does. It does. And I actually think it goes back to the piece where we were just speaking about the child feeling responsible. We don't want to put intentionally that responsibility on them to be our only safe space. There are hard, heavy conversations that probably should be held adult to adult, like you were saying.
Yeah.
And
some topics that come up that I'm thinking through are like finances. Kids do worry about finances after the death of a parent for sure. So that would be something that I would reserve for an adult to adult conversation. There are other topics too that really do. So I'd say pause and think through. Would you talk to your child about this conversation if it was the same topic but not centered around grief? So whether that's, talking about getting a new job or moving or finances, and of course we bring our kids into some of these conversations, but they're not the primary person that we're having these conversations with, dating and all of that kind of stuff, processing, the medical experience. So hopefully that gives a helpful lens for people to think through.
And maybe even leaning on a therapist or grief support for guidance as to what might be developmentally appropriate for your child at that age, I think would be probably something that's really beneficial. One last thing about emotional repair, because you spoke to it and it was a question that I wanted to ask. So given a situation where you do fall apart in front of your child and you are seeing in their eyes that they're very scared, maybe even terrified. My mommy's on the floor. I don't know how to help. I don't know how to handle this. What would a moment of repair look like then?
Yeah. So in that situation, we could go back after you've had a moment to, ground yourself and you're in a good place to have a conversation. You can go to them and say, I've been thinking about, whatever the situation was from earlier. And I want you to know that we all have big grief feelings. And sometimes my grief feelings come out as, stress or anger. Describe whatever it was and say, I'm really sorry if that scared you. My feelings are okay, but I wish that they came out in a different way. So I like when people have this repair moment that they validate their own feelings, because what that will do is it will validate a child's feelings when they feel those big feelings. But also say, I wish that I handled those feelings or got those out in a different way. So I think any of these repair situations allows adults and kids to be human and make mistakes and learn from their mistakes. And that in itself teaches children that we're all learning and getting better, and we are okay to make mistakes. But I think we can also spend time here too asking, what would be helpful for them in those situations where it feels like it's too much. Is there like a certain, do they want to snuggle afterwards? Do they want to go for a walk afterwards? So I think sometimes we can have some sort of action afterwards to reconnect and to kind of start fresh in that moment too. I always love going outside and just taking a walk or being outside in nature. It's just such a natural way to reset yourself as well as the relationship right in that time and moment too.
Yeah. I think the biggest gift that my therapist gave me was teaching me that the repair was essential. And so that for me, a lot of my grief really showed up as impatience early on, and my son got the brunt of that. And so learning from it and not trying to continue to give him the brunt of my grief and my anger and my frustrations, but also recognizing, hey, bud, what I did wasn't okay. And I should have said it this way. I handled it that way. I'm really sorry. You didn't deserve that. And then again, like you said, he is someone who wants a hug. So can I give you a hug? Would you like a hug? And most often he's ready for it. Sometimes he's not. But we've really gotten good at doing that dance over the years because, mom has made a lot of mistakes and has probably shown the emotional overwhelm too often over periods of time. And that was really helpful for me to know. And same thing modeled to him, because now he's able to do stuff like that with me too when he causes harm on his end as well.
Yeah. And that example is such a beautiful reflection too of, I would imagine over time, your reaction to these big feelings have changed. And he's probably seen that. And maybe even having that past, impatience and repair can be a way to reflect back in the moment and say, you know how I got really upset or irritated? I need a couple minutes just by myself. It's not something that you did. I just need to take a breath and be by myself for 3 minutes and regroup. So then you're also showing again that, sometimes we as adults need a minute to just take a moment. And so I would imagine that over time, it has evolved what those challenging moments look like.
Yes, definitely. So a little shift here. I know when an adult loses their person, it feels like the rug has just been pulled out from underneath them. And I'm sure for children, that sense of safety is also missing. So what actually helps children come back to a sense of safety after they lose a parent?
Yeah, there's a few things here. And of course, there are some things that are in your control and in their control, and there are some things that are not. So some of the things that we can control, we can give kids honest, age-appropriate information about what has happened, any changes that you are expecting. There is a huge benefit to just giving kids information about both, what has happened, what will happen, and doing so in a way that's really concrete and doesn't have, double meanings. I know that a lot of people will use euphemisms with children, and while it might feel softer to deliver that news, it is more confusing to children. So trying to think through before talking to a child about, what has happened or what will happen, just pausing for a second and think through, have they ever heard this word before? What would that word mean to them in the most literal sense? For example, even like lost, when somebody says, we lost dad, they might think, oh, let's go find him. They're playing hide and seek. So think through how you're saying certain things to make sure that there is not room for misconceptions to take place. I think another way to really help with a sense of safety is having some routines in place, but also flexibility. Again, it's that ebb and flow of what's going to work best for my child right now. And that's going to look different for different people. So for some families, keeping that consistent routine of maybe going to preschool or going to all of their after school activities, that's what's going to feel really safe and grounding for them to have those routines. And for other kids, they might need a little bit more flexibility and say, we're going to do these things, but maybe we're going to show up to school an hour late because you haven't been sleeping well. And we really need you to get your sleep so that you're in, a good space for the rest of the day. So having a little bit of flexibility and routines at the same time, which sounds really contradictory, but those are some things that come to mind. And again, going back to labeling and validating the emotions and experiences that they're having. I think there is such a kids are so seen when somebody is able to speak to what they are going through and not having somebody to try and fix it for them. So those are the things that are immediately coming to mind for me.
Something that popped into my mind that I hadn't thought of before, but as you're speaking, that fear for children that they could lose their other parent and the anxiety that comes with that. There is no guarantee. What is a safe way to speak to that without saying, oh, mommy, daddy's not going anywhere? Because that's not something that you can guarantee. How do we navigate that?
Yeah. I'd say that's one of the biggest fears that kids have after one parent dies. They worry about their other parent because the the unexpected happened, the worst happened, and it's natural for them to worry about that. And it's natural for a parent to want to say, no, no, everything's going to be fine. But yeah, you can't guarantee that everything is going to be fine. So, what I always recommend parents do in that situation is to let them know what you do know. I'm young. I'm healthy. I take care of myself by this, and this. Um, I will be here to care for you as long as I can. A big thing with this is kids worry, well, what if you die? Who's going to take care of me? It's that piece of it that they're scared that they're going to be all on their own. So I would follow one sentence at a time to see what they actually are asking in that very moment. We don't need to answer every single question that could be on their mind, but just what they're specifically asking, and it will build over time. And they will probably ask that question in some time. But if they ask, will you die? We can say, well, all living things die one day. Most people live until they're in their 80s or 90s or maybe even 100. But sometimes there are some things that happen. There might be an accident or an illness. And while I can't predict what happens in the future, this is what I do have control over. So helping them to see that, there are some things that you can control and there are some things that you can't control. So that's usually how I kind of lay that out for kids. And again, we're not going to take away all the fear and all the worry, and that's not our job to do either. But our job is to be a safe space for them to ask any question that they might have and to give them the answers. And as kids hear that we're giving them honest answers to even the hardest questions, they know that they can come back to us for other hard questions and they will be met with truthful answers. When we don't give truthful information, they stop asking us questions because they realize, oh, that was a lie. Why would I go and ask another question if I didn't get a truthful answer? So I encourage people, even when it's hard, to give honest, age-appropriate information to these types of questions.
That's a really valid point. Is there anything else? I feel like this question kind of extends on what you were just speaking to, but is there anything else you feel children tend to need the most from the surviving parent after a loss like this?
I feel like we've said a few of these things, but their parent to prioritize caring for themselves as well, which is easier said than done, like we've talked about. That mix of flexibility and boundaries. Something that comes to mind with this one in particular is unwanted behaviors. And I've had parents ask me all the time, is this an age appropriate behavior that I see from my child with maybe they're having more meltdowns or, some sort of behavior that their parent doesn't want? Or is this their grief coming out? What do I do with it? I don't want to put up too many boundaries because they've already had so many hard things happening. But there is a boundary and a balance here that we want to provide. So what I always recommend is we, again, validate the emotion that is behind that behavior and set up boundaries and say, it's okay that you're angry. It is not okay that you are hitting me or saying these mean words to me, and then give an alternative too. So I think sometimes people are really scared to give, I wouldn't even say they're strict boundaries, but consequences or boundaries to their grieving child because they think that, they've already been through so much. I don't want to take away, whatever it is, take away their video games for a little while. But we do need to provide some boundaries, and that actually offers safety as well, a sense of safety that having those boundaries gives them.
Mm-hmm. The next question is, what are realistic expectations for grieving parents during this season?
I think this is different for everyone. And something that comes to mind with this is every season and year might look a little bit different for both yourself and your grieving children. So, um, sometimes you're in survival mode. Sometimes you're just, getting through the day, the week. And sometimes you're actually more in a thriving state. So to give yourself that gentle permission to just see how it feels for you guys as a family, what it's like for you as an individual, and not to put so much pressure on yourself. It doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to say or do the perfect thing. Um, we can just let that go. I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have everything perfect, to make sure that they get through this awful thing. But it's going to be a little bit different for everyone, depending on what is happening for them in that year, that season, and just to kind of flow with it. So I know that's going to look very different for different people, but yeah, I know that's not like a super specific.
But I don't think it can be, right? I think that that's perfect. I think, learning this dance, it's not easy. It's really hard, actually. And so self-compassion and compassion for our children and everything that's going on, giving grace is going to be really, really helpful. But you also spoke to the different seasons and, even when joy comes back to us, what does that look like? What does that look like as a family unit? And is guilt coming alongside that? And how do we navigate that together, right?
Yeah.
So I think
Something else that I'm thinking of too is this very real thing that is we all have different grief styles. So we could have one child who is grieving a very specific way. Maybe they are very emotive and they're crying or they're showing their grief very much in an emotional space. And maybe we have another child that really doesn't want to talk about it at all. And maybe they're getting their grief out through their sports or music or other like very active types of ways. They're both coping with their grief, but in very different ways. And sometimes we can have this dynamic of the surviving parent having a very different coping style than their child. And again, having that flexibility to kind of meet in the middle sometimes, but also have time where you, as individuals, go off and do what you need to do to care for yourself, to care for your grief, to have these different rituals and ways to connect with your person who has died too. So that can look like a lot of different things for different families and different individuals. But I think that goes along with this great with just having a looser expectation of what this grief thing looks like. I think so many people think that grief is just this sadness and longing and yearning, and it is those things, but it is so much more than that. And just opening yourself up to um, all of the different feelings and reactions and ways in which that we can grieve.
thank you. Yeah, those were going to be the next couple of questions that I had for you about grieving adults and children and how we all grieve differently. And so if there's anything, I know you said like having some more flexibility and just, being more compassionate, more understanding. Is there anything else you feel like parents should understand about this? Because I do see this. This happens a lot. And I have conversations around this a lot in session as well, that one child, exactly what you spoke to, one child wants to talk all the time about their parent. And the other one is like, I don't want to be a part of this. I don't want to talk about it. Kind of seems shut down. And there's this tendency to panic, right? Because the child that's openly grieving, it seems like the best, most appropriate way. And you're then looking at your other child and they're like, I don't want to talk about dad at all. And you're like, oh no, what's going to, again, going back to that, are they going to be ruined? What's going to happen to them if they are actively, outwardly processing this death, So what can we understand about that as parents, and what can we do to support the different grief styles?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think just acknowledging is the first step that we all grieve and cope in different ways. And that's huge because I think sometimes if you have a different grief style than your parent or your other sibling, I think you can think that you're doing this grief thing wrong. But acknowledging that all of these different ways are healthy ways, I think really the only unhealthy way to cope with grief is really if you're doing, you know, if you're doing something that is risking your own health or somebody else's, like physical, emotional harm to other people or yourself, yes, that can be an issue, especially like if you're, a teen and you're getting into like risky things like drugs and like that kind of stuff is not a healthy way to cope with grief.
Right.
Aside from that, all of these different ways to cope with grief are healthy ways. They're not wrong. So acknowledging it first and saying, it's okay that, they're grieving in a different way. And that can teach those kids some tolerance too, that we all do grieve differently. And I think carving out some time where they can grieve in whatever way is their preferred way to cope with it. So it's this balance of like being together in your grief and trying to find ways that all work for everybody, but also having that separate time too. So I think the common theme and thread for today is it's all a balance and kind of flowing into whatever is helpful at the moment. And there will be some tension sometimes with, like you said, maybe one person wants to talk about dad all the time and the other person's like, I don't want to hear it. I don't want to talk about it. It's too upsetting. And creating space to say, I hear you. It sounds like it's really hard to talk about dad right now or to see these pictures right now. Maybe we can put those things away for right now while we're all together. And I can carve out some time with, your sister later today to look at pictures because that seems like it's really helpful for her. So, creating that space to kind of move through those differences.
I think it's a great idea. Is there anything else that you feel parents most often misunderstand about how grief shows up in children?
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a few things because kids do grieve differently. They're not many adults. So some of the pieces that are common things coming up for kids, they grieve in this piecemeal kind of fashion. They don't grieve all at once. Their brain just can't process grief in that way. So they might ask a couple questions about their parent who died or what happened or questions coming up about the afterlife or questions, a variety of different topics. They'll ask a question, they'll get the information that they're seeking, and then they'll move on to like what's for dinner or can we go play this. So they jump in and out of these big heavy conversations. So it's not that they don't grieve as deeply, they absolutely do. They just don't stay in it as long, and they can just bounce right into some other fun play activities. So that's what I mean by that, like piecemeal processing of their grief. And then another thing that kids often do is they re-grieve. So your son, he was a toddler when this happened. So he could only understand it at that toddler level. And then as he gets a little bit older, when he gets into his preschool years, he then reprocesses that and probably went through a phase of asking a million different questions about what happened, it all comes up again. And then every single stage that kids go through, they'll reprocess it again. They'll have different questions that might be a little bit more abstract as they get older, different phases. For example, kids that are going through these big developmental milestones of like maybe they're learning how to drive, maybe they're graduating, maybe for girls they get their period for the first time, and if it's mom who was the one that died, like that's a huge milestone that they're going to be missing mom and re-grieving in a way because their person who is supposed to guide them through this is no longer there. So there can be these different touch points that are significant for that child that really opens up that grief all over again, and it never really closes, but it's like it's just a different lens.
I've seen so much of that with my son. Exactly what you spoke to. Oh, and even like some really hard, heavy questions. And then he'll be like, all right, I'm going to go on my rollerblades. And I'm less like at the table, like, oh, geez, okay. Like I need a moment to sit with everything that he just asked and how I handled it and how I'm processing that. Right. But it is wild to see that difference. Whereas I feel like sometimes for adults that floors us and we really do, it could take like a whole day to come back from some of the heaviness that we're processing. Whereas for them,
kids can be so blunt in their questions.
Oh, yeah.
They ask too.
Yep.
The younger kids tend to have magical thinking about things sometimes. So sometimes some of like the preschool age kids will think things like, I said something that maybe caused my person to die, or I didn't want them to do this and that caused this. So there can be this magical thinking that sometimes happens. And every developmental stage will have a different understanding process and some different things that we might want to keep an eye out for to help support them through their grief.
Yeah. Two questions. When should a parent consider outside support for their child? Are there signs that may indicate a child needs additional therapeutic support? And you kind of spoke to that just a minute ago, kind of, especially for the older kids going down an unhealthy numbing route. But in your experience, what type of support or therapy tends to be the most helpful? And when do we move that direction?
Yeah. So I think any kind of support after the death of a parent or caregiver is really good and helpful. I wouldn't say it's ever the wrong move to get support. I think grief care and support can be preventative care, making sure that kids have a space to process their grief, to express their grief, to feel validated in it, to understand what has happened. So I don't think it's ever not the right time or place to get support, but some red flags for needing more support would be things like they're having a really difficult time with sleep or eating or behaviors, or some of their behaviors are regressing. Sometimes big friendship changes or issues in school. Even when kids are voicing a lot of questions and worries, I'd say those would all be a good indicator that, okay, maybe we can use some extra support. And that support is going to look very different for every child. I mean, some kids will benefit with the one-on-one grief support from a children's grief specialist. Some will do better in grief support groups. Some will do better in these guided expressive art type of activities. So knowing your child is, a great way to and you could try these things out too. I always tell kids that we're going to try a bunch of different ways to help support you. Some of these ways might feel like they're a great fit and they're really helpful for you. Some might not. And just because something doesn't feel like it's helpful right now doesn't mean it's not going to be helpful in 6 months or in 2 years. So those conversations are going to look a little bit different depending on how old your child is. But using the integration of activities that they already know and love is something that can be really helpful to help support them where they are in their grief with processing and helping to support their coping too.
Something that has helped me too. So my son's been in counseling and therapy since he was young. But one thing that I've always noticed is do I as the parent need support in navigating what they're going through? So for my son, there's a lot of conversations around death and dying, and that he's not scared to die because daddy's in this place, right? And that can be very overwhelming and scary to me. And so I'm like, wait, I need support with this. I need to, learn how to navigate this better or understand his thinking better in a way that I just, that might send me into panic or misunderstanding. And so that's something that's kind of helped guide me. Oh, okay, I think right now would be a really good time to continue to support him or get him back into the support that he needs.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's so helpful for for parents to have that support, somebody to lean on to say, this is what's coming up for my child. Is this normal? How do I help them process this, navigate this? Because even when kids are getting support in these places, whether it's like that one-on-one support or group support, then they come home and you as the parent are with them, the majority of the time. So if you have the skills to help them through everything, it's just going to make everything so much easier for that dynamic with both of you guys going through the grief in your own ways. And so it's just this like beautiful support network to have that community to help everybody cope with their grief for sure.
Last one. What would you want every widowed parent listening today to know if you haven't already hit on that?
Yeah. The biggest thing that comes to mind is kind of building on what I just said with you don't need to do this alone. It's super cliche to say, but like really finding your village. I know that this this feels very isolating, and you often probably do feel very alone, but you don't have to do all of this alone. So maybe it's building up your community, your network of providers and professionals and friends and families that are able to offer that healing space for you. And your circles might change over time. You might realize that there are certain people and spaces that really provide that safe space for you to lean on. And there are other people that you've known forever and you realize they might not be the ones that can really support you through this. So really finding that village and realizing that, you don't need all the answers. You don't need to do this perfectly, but leaning on those people that can help you through all of this is what I hope everybody can kind of take from this and just intentionally building up that village over time.
Truly. It's invaluable.
It doesn't happen. Yeah. And it doesn't happen all at once. And I know for a lot of people in that fresh, acute grief, they feel like they don't have their village. And I see you and hear you. And over time, that can be created.
Yes, I think it's so important to know. One of my clients just said this the other day. You've taught me that I don't have to do this alone. I can, but I don't have to. And I don't want to. I want to be in community with people. And there are people out there that can be the healing balm that we need, the support that we need. Because yes, social circles are definitely a secondary loss that we experience, and who you think is going to be your tribe isn't necessarily going to be your tribe once you've gone through something like this. So I love that you spoke to that. I am so appreciative that you were here today and having this conversation. I think it's an essential conversation that we need to have, and it's really going to allow some listeners to exhale and just know that, oh my gosh, I am not the only one going through this, because we carry so much. We carry our own grief. We carry our children's grief. We carry the pressure and the fear and responsibility and the exhaustion that, we have to do it all and we have to do it flawlessly. And I think today's conversation really reminds us that your child does not need a perfect grieving parent. They need one that's connected. They need one that's available to repair when harm is created, because it's going to happen. Someone that's just going to keep showing up and is going to allow their children to feel like they can exist safely and continues to love them through all of this. So thank you so much for being here, for your work, for helping grieving families feel less alone. And thanks to everyone listening today too.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been listening to The Widows Collective. I'm Lauren Lentz, and it means so much to me that you spent this time here today. If you found comfort or connection in today's episode, I invite you to please subscribe, leave a rating, or share it with someone who might need a little support. You can also follow me on Instagram at I'm Sorry We're Friends, and join my email list at laurenlentz.com to explore my one-to-one grief coaching, group program, retreats, and other tools designed to help widows navigate loss with understanding and guidance. I hope you'll join me next week for another conversation where we'll continue exploring grief, healing, and ways to reimagine life after loss. I'm sorry you're here, and I'm so grateful that you are. Thank you for being a part of this community. Your presence is an act of courage and self-compassion, and I'm honored to walk this path alongside you.